Hey guys, it's Matt again. I'd like to preface first of all by saying, or by apologizing for not being able to meet you guys in person. But I'm hoping that these videos will help you further educate you in fly fishing. Okay, so the last videos that I gave you showed how to quote unquote read the river and kind of understand where a fish could potentially be. It's not a fact that the fish will be there necessarily, but it's an educated guess. So go back into that video and see where I placed my fly, see where the current's going, where that slow moving water is meeting the fast moving water. That's where you want to place your fly. So I thought that I'd get back into kind of the gear aspect, because that's really important. As you can see, I have hundreds or maybe even thousands of different flies, and this has been acquired over 10 to 20 years worth of just going into fly shops and asking them what a fish is biting on. So what I would recommend, if you do decide to go get into fly fishing and do decide to go to a destination to fly fish, let's say you go to Yellowstone or Bend, Oregon, you'd first of all go to the nearest fly shop and you ask them, okay, hey, I'm here to fly fish, let's say the Madison River in Yellowstone. What have they been biting on? That's probably your best way of catching, using the right fly and catching a fish. So you go into the fly shop, you ask them, what type of flies should I use on the Madison River during the morning, afternoon, and evening? And so they would recommend, a lot of different flies. There's a few different main categories. There's a dry fly that stays on the surface of the water. There's a nymph, which is a quote-unquote wet fly that is underneath the water. And those are the two main different types of flies. A dry fly is supposed to represent an older kind of adult fly in the life stage, whereas a nymph is in its pupa or an early life cycle, and fish feed on both types. For an instance, this is considered a mayfly, and if you do get into this, you'll be able. It doesn't look exactly like a real life mayfly, but it has characteristics that will show, or that there's characteristics that fish will be able to see and will then eventually bite on, hopefully. So that's a mayfly type of fly. Let's see. This is considered, and there's all different ranges and sizes. This is considered a caddisfly. Both the mayfly and the caddisfly are quote-unquote adult stages, not the end of life stage, but an adult stage of a caddis and mayfly insect. There's different sizes. It's kind of counterintuitive, but the larger so this is probably a number 16 caddisfly, and it's counterintuitive because the larger the number is, the smaller the fly is. So this is probably a number 16 caddisfly, and it's green on the bottom if you can see that. And this might be a number 4 caddisfly. And you can see how, this looks a little bit different, but there's small deviations of how they're shaped and how they're tied, that they're able to look like a mayfly, or they're able to also look like kind of different types of insects as well. So you're able to cover multiple insect species. So those are the invertebrate species, caddis and mayfly insects. And then you're able to get into terrestrials where, these will look more like a grasshopper maybe. I think that's a terrestrial. So that's a grasshopper. And, so this is probably a larger size, maybe a 5 or a 4 size. And then they get even bigger. They get even bigger. Like this sucker stuck in there. That might be a 2 or 3 size grasshopper. Okay, so yeah, like how I was saying though, just go, if you decide to go somewhere to fly fish, just go into the nearest fly shop and ask them what they're biting on. They'll recommend, they'll recommend some dry flies, they'll recommend some nymphs, wet flies, they'll recommend some terrestrials maybe, and then they'll recommend some really cool leech patterns. These are subsurface wet flies, but instead of letting a dry fly, how we would normally let a dry fly drift down the stream like a natural, like consider when you're fly fishing a stream and you're fly fishing a dry fly, think of it as a leaf floating down the stream. That's what you want your presentation to look like. But when this is more kind of an advanced fly fishing technique. If you're using one of these, you're casting into the water and then you're stripping in. I never showed it to you guys in the past video, but you would strip this in, and it's an actual kind of a leech or maybe a small little fish. So that's the flies for the most part. We can get into, if you want, we can talk on the phone too individually, and I can describe the different flies that I recommend. I wanted to show you now, I touched on it a little bit, but I touched on the fly rod aspect. This is really important, of course. When you're considering purchasing a fly rod, if you're fishing smaller streams, somewhere in California, Nevada, if there's smaller streams, you want to purchase a higher quality rod. Reason being is because the tension's really placed on the rod when you're fishing smaller streams. If you're fishing, let's say saltwater or something like that, you want to go with a cheaper quality rod, but more of an expensive reel. So the different sizes for rods is a really important thing. So they go from sizes 1 all the way to, I think, maybe 13 or 14. The number 1, just like how the fly sizes is counterintuitive, the number size of the rod is counterintuitive as well. Or it doesn't, maybe not counterintuitive, it just doesn't make much sense. But this is a number, right, a number 5 rod. This is a number 5 rod. And you can think of that as a middle ground fly rod. You can fish small streams, but you can also fish large streams as well. The larger the size, the larger the number, the larger the rod. So I guess it does make sense. I guess the only counterintuitive aspect was the fly. But the larger size number for rods you go up in, the larger body of water you can fish. So, but I would recommend, if you want to get into this, I recommend a number 5 because you're able to cover a lot of different types of water. So when you get a size rod, you have to match that same size with your reel. So this is a reel that is able to cover a 4, 5, and 6 weighted rod. So this is it's a 5 weight rod, or a 5 weight reel. So that matches with my rod itself. So that's kind of for the reel and rod. That's about it really. I also spoke about in the last video, I showed you the different types of line. Normally when you're fishing a small stream, you'll have a floating line. This is a floating line that will then be connected to a monofilament line here. And this is translucent so that the fish can't see the line itself. If they did see the line, they'd get spooked. And that's why normally speaking, you have about a 8 to 10 foot length of monofilament away from the floating line. So the fish could maybe see this potentially, but they won't see the fly that's connected to this monofilament. So it gets really, really thin. So when you start talking about, this is called a leader and this is called the floating line normally. When you start talking about the leader, you'll start getting involved in the tippet. This is a tippet line. It goes from, I normally go from a 3, I normally go through a 4X, a 5X, and a 6X. And a 4X is a larger diameter line. A 5X is kind of a medium-sized line. And a 6X is a really thin line. And the reason why you'd buy a tippet line is because after a while, you'll start losing flies. You'll start having to cut line off. And as you do that, the dimension of the leader gets thicker as you go up. It's a tapered leader. And what you do is you would tie a knot to the existing leader and you'd add in a taper. You'd add in a tippet. It's kind of like a Band-Aid. You're able to extend the life of your leader line. A few other gadgets that I have with me are, you'd always want to have the pliers. You're able to, if you get a fly stuck in a fish's mouth, you're able to come into the mouth and pull the fly out. That's really important to have. What's always important is having a little clipper. You can get little gadgets that will attach to your bag, like I have here. Here's also a cool little gadget or fluid. It's called floatant. And so after a while, if you're fly fishing with these dry flies, they'll get waterlogged. And so they won't float above the surface how they're supposed to. And what I would do is, in those scenarios, I would dry the fly off with my t-shirt or cloth, and I'd apply some floatant. And that'll keep the fly above the surface of the water. The next thing I wanted to talk about is a thermostat, or a thermometer, sorry. I never really had this before, but going back to Montana last summer, it got kind of hot. And so knowing your temperature in the water is really important. Reason being is I took a photo. This is off of a monument that was next to a stream. So it says here, below 65 degrees, you're able to fish. Fish respond to water temperature. They're very sensitive to water temperature. So fishing below 65 is fine. That's good. That's what you want to do. Fishing between 65 and 66 degrees, that's kind of medium. And then anything above 67 degrees Fahrenheit, you shouldn't fish. Because if you catch a fish and it's warm and the water's warm, you can potentially kill them. So you don't want to do that. So I'd recommend buying this. Okay, so I wanted to end my teaching session on how to tie a knot. So there's a few different knots. So what I want you to do is imagine this is an eye of a fly, eye of the hook. And this is a really simple knot that you'd be able to replicate, and you probably already do. So you thread the line, and pretend this is your monofilament leader. You thread that line through the eye, come around. I normally put my middle finger down there just to hold the eye and separate both the segments of the line. And then you just start twisting it around. I normally twist it between 5 to 6 times. You can do less if you want. Depends on how many times you want to lose your fly. And then once you're done, you take that tag. Once you're done twisting it around, you take that tag and you throw it back through that loop. And this is important. You want to, when you're tying your monofilament line, you want to put some saliva on it, because once you're tying that knot, when you're clenching that knot down, it'll add friction. It normally goes back, but this is for gift wrapping. When you're then tying the knot down, it'll create friction, and which will then weaken your monofilament line. So if you add saliva to that knot before you tie it down, it adds less friction to the knot. The next knot I wanted to show you is a complicated and complex knot, but hopefully I can show it to you easily. When I mentioned adding tippet to the leader to extend the life of your leader, there's a critical knot that you have to do, and you probably already know it because you're cowgirls and stuff. But what you'll do is pretend this is the leader line here, and pretend this is your tippet line segment. What you'll do is, and I want to combine both of these sections together. What you'll do is bring both segments next to each other, parallel to each other. Hold this section, the leader section and the tippet section together. And then you hold both sections together and you create a loop. If I can do it with this president wrap. Create a loop. Maybe I might not be able to, but sorry guys, give me 1 second. Oh, crap. Great, all right. Pretend Holly's laughing right now. All right. You create a loop. God damn it. Do it live. All right, so once you have that loop, pin that loop between your index finger and your thumb. And so you're supposed to have 2 sections. Gosh. I'll get it here, guys. All right. You know what? Sorry. We're improvising. Okay. Think of this as the leader line still, and think of this as the tippet line here. What you do is bring them together, create this loop here. There's a loop here, right? You can see that, I hope. Pin it between your index finger and your thumb. Bring the tag in, bring both tag ends of the leader line and your tippet line through that loop. Bring it here. It'll take you a long time to figure this out. It did for me. Bring both ends. I'm doing a crummy job, guys, but bring both ends through this loop. Don't be afraid to use your teeth. Sorry, Mom. Bring that to... So you have both sections of the tippet and the leader through that loop that you had created. And then you'll do it a second time. Make sure you do it 2 times. Don't do it... I've done it 3 times, but you really only need 2 times. Then you bring both sections through. So I'm bringing in the leader line section through that loop. And then boom, and then while holding both sections of both the leader and the tippet, you'll then just bring them together and you pull them together. And every time you tie a knot, I give it kind of a test. I don't pull too hard, but I pull hard enough that it's, clenched. I was supposed to add saliva to that knot, but I didn't. But each time I recommend, when you're tying a knot to a monofilament line, add some saliva or some type of liquid to keep it more smooth and less friction when you're tying the knot, so it keeps that strength. So this is the knot that you'd use to tie your leader line and your tippet line. The knot that I showed you earlier, and it's a rudimentary, easy knot. This knot's to tie either your tippet line or your leader line. Let's say you just bought a leader line and you have your full leader line, then you just tie it like that. But if you had a tippet line, you do the same thing, but it'd be just a different type of line. I think that concludes my lesson, guys. I apologize for not being there in person. I really missed out. You can blame Holly for that. Just kidding. But I really missed you guys, and I hope to be able to do this in person with you guys. And thank you so much for listening to me. That's it.